folks. Welcome. Thank you very much for coming. Appreciate it. There will be pizza arriving in, we're not exactly sure, but within the next 20 minutes or so. Maybe we'll take a little break and you can get some and come back. We'll end this session specifically for parents at about 10:07, and then we go into a discussion, more general discussion focused on the cluster development ideas that are being proposed for updating our ordinances. So my name's Greg Mee. I'm chair of the planning board here. If I was a parent, I know I would be concerned about what's going on in the current school situation. That is not anything that has anything to do with the planning board. The decisions about the school are made by the school board, school committees, so it's not something that the school board has authority over. I mean, the planning board has authority. Planning board does have some responsibility in terms of the school, and that is mostly to prevent the school being overwhelmed with students that it can't support. We have a capital improvement plan in our town, which is between 2 and 3% increase in budget yearly, and that is a reason why we are to limit our development. We have a development cap at 3% of residents in town, and that is based on our projected ability to increase services to meet that. I'd like to introduce members of the planning board. Kent is the selectman representative. Hillary is an alternate. Lois is our secretary. Ray is our associate administrator. Ray is our recording secretary. Lois, Ann, John, Ray. We also have two. I'm doing badly tonight. We also have representatives from Central Regional Planning. Central Regional Planning Commission is office funded by the state to help small towns like ours with volunteer planning boards who get the names all mixed up all the time, and they try to keep us in line with regulations. When the town has a need for their services, we ask them to give us a proposal on what they can help us with, and then the funding for that is partially paid by the state and partially by the town, typically. So this session is specifically for parents to answer any questions that you folks have that we can help you with. Do you want to know what the master plan is? Do you want to know what zoning is and how that works? Questions? How do we start?
I guess what's the master plan? I heard something about low-income housing or something. I don't know. What's the master plan?
Master plan. Mike is an expert on the master plan. Can you give us a quick?
Sure. The plan for tomorrow. So it's an update of the plan. The town's master plan is called Plan for Tomorrow. Last updated in 2010. Takes a look at housing, land use, transportation, natural features. One of those things that comes out of the master plan are recommendations for potential changes to the zoning ordinance or subdivision and site plan regulations. So, part of some of the things that we're talking about tonight are some of those recommendations that we've been talking about in the master plan relative to different types of housing. Improving or making some changes to your cluster ordinance to actually make it more usable, which has been on the books for many years, used a couple of times. But some other things also about perhaps changing adding some uses to the exit 17 and exit 18 area to allow for some different types of uses. It's really building on the master plan, the plan for tomorrow from 12 years ago. Because one of the things we talked about were the work that the town did and the Economic Development Commission back then did to try to get more industrial and commercial development around the exit 18 area. So how can that be done in a different way to actually have it happen? And that kind of percolates through the master plan, but the way it happens from the town's perspective is through changes to the zoning ordinance that happens at town meeting. So this is kind of a concurrent process, updating the master plan, while at the same time talking about some things that the planning board could recommend to bring to town meeting to be voted on to change, future zoning ordinance. So we'll talk about that tonight. But we also, I think, have some information about just the demographics, because the master plan is a way to learn about demographics, learn about how we're getting older, smaller households, which kind of add to the demand for different types of smaller housing if you want that. And that's got some information just even on school enrollment and things like that that are kind of helping the planning board work their way towards making some recommendations. Long-winded response, now a planner, I'm sorry.
How are the objectives in the plan determined? It seems like, you're talking about looking at the housing one. Objective one is support of mixed housing densities and types in Canterbury. Are these approved? Are these just ideas? Where do things stand with these objectives?
We've been working on this for almost 5 years now. There was a hiatus in the middle of COVID, of course. It started with surveys that were done, both on paper that were available at the library, at the store, at the town office, announced in the newsletter, on the Facebook page, and the town email. So asking people what their priorities are, what their needs, what they would like. One of the big priorities is we like the town the way it is. We don't want to see a lot of change. Another thing that came up is we want to retire, and we don't want to live in our big house, and we would like to have a place that we could afford to live in Canterbury. Another one was young kids who come from town want to get started out, and they're priced out of the market. So that was a lot of town input on need for more housing. What else does the town like? Agriculture. We have farms in town. Are they really a huge amount of acreage? No. But they are a flavor of the town. They're the historical flavor of the town, and I like it. Everybody's saying they like it, so that's something we're trying to preserve. So we're trying to preserve the things that we have, that people like. We're trying to make small, incremental change to which is the way Canterbury has worked since it started zoning in the 1950s. One of the first towns in this area to start zoning. And Canterbury avoided the big housing boom and housing bust that happened in the 80s because we have not been as supportive of development as many other communities. And I don't think that, nobody wants that to change. We're looking for incremental change to accommodate the needs of property owners and the needs of our residents for some more options on housing.
Well, I would also follow up that we had several visioning sessions and a really
Yes.
good crowd at this room. And what we've tried to do just to distill all those comments that talk about all those things that Brent was talking about, but Also, make some recommendations for the tools that are available to the town on how to address, the need for different types of housing in a sustainable way. And I think that key is, you like the way it is, but there are some potential small incremental changes that can be made.
You do realize that these small incremental changes with zoning will be opening up a can of worms. You keep pushing this narrative, more development, more development. And this is the same narrative that you push with all the surrounding towns associated with the Central New Hampshire Regional Planning Commission. So why do you keep pushing the narrative of development?
So, Craig, I think I can address the fact that we are working with the planning board, and we have some great visioning sessions here, and we're not pushing anything. Our role is to support the planning board, and basically, we've had a lot of discussions about just, approach to the master plan, approach to potential tools that are out there. We were at those visioning sessions too, and our role is to help the planning board to make it whatever changes to the master plan, but also help them get to town meeting if they wish.
So let me address this a little bit more. Zoning isn't the magic bullet that can solve everyone's problems, especially when people have different agendas or different needs. Property rights. If I own 500 acres somewhere, I have a right to try to develop. Zoning tries to make a way that people can exercise their property right without impinging on the property rights of others. An example I often use is, you like to look at the stars at night. I'm concerned about security. I want a big light in my yard. I want it on all night long. Security is my right to enjoy my home. Your property right is to look at the stars. These are things that do not work very well together. So we try to have zoning that says, oh, your light's got to be pointed down. It can't be pointed shining into somebody else's window. So it's a balance. We're trying to achieve a balance so that a big developer doesn't come in, buy 500 acres and say, I want to put in 350 units and I'm going to spread them all over. We're looking for a way to, by providing opportunities to do smaller, more development that is more appropriate for our community. That's basically the goal. Yes, Al?
Yeah, so this is going to be sort of tangential. I know we've talked about this for the last 2 years, we've been coming to these meetings, and recently Concord has really stepped in the development phase between the heights of the mall and what they proposed up off Heights of 17. At what point do we as a town, I don't want to say step back, but become more responsive to what they're doing as opposed to trying to push that ourselves? Because we brought up in previous meetings, we're not an ideal community for how we want to define the affordable housing. We don't have public transportation. We're on the 93 corridor or 106.
Yes.
But at what point do we let them do that and then be reactive to what they're doing, as well as when we talk about cluster divisions or exit 18 and 17. Exit 18 has been commercial forever. Nothing commercial goes in there. And we thought potentially, could you change that zoning to maybe that's a place that you would put potential clusters? Is that a better opportunity than wasting land that's never going to be used? It's just, I think there's a couple things that we're bringing up the same things, but the same things come up every meeting, and we just kind of keep circling the ball. Maybe if we start pivoting a little bit, we could, take smaller bites out of the whole. Maybe that area is changed to a cluster division, or makes it more cluster welcoming, and we let 17 develop on its own, the Concord side, and then we can respond to that, maybe it's storefronts or apartments, kind of let it go slowly, as trying to throw all this stuff in at once, because as you said, 3% growth, all it takes is one cluster subdivision to potentially throw a wrench in the system.
But clusters, so there's a formula for how you figure out what you can put in a cluster, which is based on our current zoning, about how many houses you can put on, say, 100 acres in a given zone that requires a 5 acres minimum, right? So if it's 100 acres, how many houses?
Well, I'm just saying, say you put those 10 houses at the top of the borough, now you have the burden on the town to plow, maintain, extend it. We've already got a grader down, we're down a backhoe. There's a lot of things that we have to think where these are located. A cluster subdivision on 18 is far more manageable to maintain and it's more serviceable.
Okay, that is one of the things that is that we are discussing and will be proposing, is to allow some residential mixed cluster at exit 18. We're also moving away from the heavy industry. And heavy industry was started there. I think the idea was because of the railroad service. It hasn't happened. We're getting the storage units in there. That's not a heavy burden on the town services. So, and let's talk about that, town services and costs. Some people feel that more development is going to reduce your tax rate. I don't believe that. There are a number of studies that say that that is not true. It will increase your tax base, but it does not reduce your tax rate. So at what point do we need another fire? At what point do we need more police? Which comes back to the capital improvement plan of our 3.5% increase in expenditure. So the plan being that we are not exceeding our ability to serve. And exit 18, exit 17. Exit 17 is a little bit different. There's very little left of land there that is available for development. But we've talked about possibly, so right now they're allowed an AD, additional dwelling unit above their buildings. For one thing we're talking here to say, so why can't that be 3 apartments above those buildings? Again, within the building cap, of course. Danielle?
So, I help out with the community soccer program for Canterbury Recreation, and what I've seen over the past few years that I've been involved is already that we're experiencing a lot of growth. So, example, last year we had 68 kids in the program. This year we had 102. I'd like to think that it's because of my excellent marketing skills and coaching, but I don't think that's it.
It's partly that. It's partly that.
Maybe. Our pre-K group, 3 years ago, when Peter was in it, was 8 kids. This year it was 28. And our K1 group was, I don't know what it was before, but this year it was 36. It was a really large group. As I've met a lot of these families, a lot of them have moved to town during COVID. So, or in the past few years since COVID happened. So a lot of them are new to Canterbury. So what I'm seeing is that growth is happening, right? And I guess I'm wondering if you have a projection, if you have a number that you're going for as you change these ordinances and try to bring in more growth, what are you looking to achieve, and at what point do we, over what time, how much growth? Because I think it's already happening the way things are.
I don't think we are trying to speed, the object is not to speed up growth. The object is that there's a lot of pressure for growth. Property owners, developers have a right to develop and to use their property. And we're trying to make a way that rein it in a way that works better for Canterbury, so that we're not changing the character of Canterbury. I have a question on this. You're talking about the numbers in your soccer program. How does that relate to the numbers in the school classes?
Yeah, sir.
I think what's missing in the data that you're sharing is that last year's enrollment as of June 2023 at Canterbury Elementary was right back up at 119. I think these graphs are indicative of many of the things that have happened throughout the COVID pandemic, relative to kids homeschooling, kind of pods, people paying for private
Yeah.
schooling because they didn't want their kids remote learning or being kind of dealing with pressures of masking in the school system. And this year's enrollment, K through 2 at Canterbury Elementary is up at 63 students. It's a high number, so I'm not sure where, my guess is the COVID pandemic. And on that note, I'm curious how much of this plan is in relation to kind of the reaction from the pandemic, because I moved in 2019. Since then, my own property is up $250,000. So when we're talking lower income, how much of this is inflated due to what our nation has experienced?
First off, I believe these are statewide demographics that come from there's a state office that does this, right?
The school, so which graph are you referring to, the population or the school enrollment?
Tell us about both.
Yeah, we can talk a little bit about demographics, and COVID certainly has disrupted things, and things could change, definitely. One of the kind of interesting things about Canterbury and a lot of towns in New Hampshire is the population peaked early in the 1800s. Canterbury's population actually peaked in 1820 at 1,696 residents, and then it declined for many, many years. And it actually bottomed out in 1930 at 505 residents. It's been slowly increasing, and from 1960 on to about 2010, there was definitely a rapid increase in population. And I think that's reflected in the way the past planning boards have handled that growth. The data, though, that we've seen, the census data from 2010 to 2020 has shown a slowdown. And actually, I think you have in your packet, there's a graph that shows that. The population growth has slowed considerably relative even to the state and to the county.
Is that the percent change in population in New Hampshire, Merrimack County, Town of Canterbury?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
2040 projection?
Yeah, and yes, but the projections for the future, the population growth is projected across the state to slow down. So I'm sorry, did you want to do questions, or do you want me to?
Hold on, we're trying to answer people's questions here, so I think that got a little bit off track, but can you help us get back on track to answer your question?
Sure. My request is that, especially when sharing materials, is it possible to include the 2022 to 2023 school year enrollment? Is this page that outlines the decline in school enrollment here at our elementary school doesn't show last year, which is right back where 2016 was at. And that's a big concern that I have, especially with how big the K-2 cohort.
We can certainly update that. When I looked, I didn't see those numbers. I took the numbers from DOE.
I'm on the FAU 80 website. It has all of that
Okay,
information.
yeah, but no, we can certainly update those numbers. With regard to, actually, since we're talking about school enrollment, and I know that there was a question at the last meeting, I think, on homeschool children and how that was reflected. I did check actually with the business administrator, the SAU business administrator, and she indicated that it's self-reported, first of all, so the numbers for homeschool are, they're but they're not including the DOE numbers, which I think was brought up. That is the case. But those numbers for self-reported numbers for homeschooling also were in decline. So I did want to just bring that up, that it kind of mirrors the overall decline in the state, and I'm not disputing that there may have been an uptick recently, but overall, in the states and, you know, what we've seen with the Canterbury Elementary School, 2006, the school enrollment was about 140. So it did drop, and COVID, certainly it dropped even more significantly with COVID, and it sounds like now there might be an uptick. So we certainly can update those numbers on that.
Thank you.
So the other thing that we found, though, in addition to school enrollment, is that the population in town is aging, if we look at the census data. If you look at the median age, the census data in Canterbury, in 2000 it was 42.4, and the most recent census in 2020 was 47.8. So, and I don't think that's probably a surprise to many people. I mean, if you look at like our local land use boards and things, and I go to different towns in New Hampshire, and you know, the land use boards are greater now than they were, and I think that, you know, there's definitely that trend across the state. So, sorry here.
Can you talk first, sorry, the increase in single-person households? This is another reason why smaller units are desirable for us. Is the number of single-family households has gone up very significantly. Can you tell us about that?
Well, and I guess to go along with that is household size in general has been declining. And I don't have the figures right in front of me, but I know in the master plan chapter, the household size, average household size in Canterbury and in many towns in New Hampshire has been declining over the years. So there is sort of a mismatch, I think, in housing where, you know, there's a lot of big older homes, but smaller families occupying them, and that can create issues as well.
So, why do we think Canterbury is having an uptick in school enrollment when other towns are not? You seem to have some experience with this.
Sure. I would suspect it may be the case that many people moved in. I was one of those people that moved in right before the pandemic. I played an active role in town to try to connect more families to programming and things that are happening. Because I think there are a lot of young families that I connect with on a regular basis that aren't well connected within the town because we all have to isolate so much. I'm pregnant with my third, my second, and even into third pregnancy now. Huge implications around what that looks like for safety protocols within the family. So I think that plays a big role in what's going on.
We got a lot of hands. This young lady hasn't spoken. Let's give her a shot.
Oh, hello. I just wanted to follow up on your comment about single-family homes and the data you're looking at. I think you said it's from 2020. Are you factoring in people living in ADUs? Because I feel like a lot of people are getting those now. Like they're coming up everywhere. So when people are filling out these, I'm assuming it's census data or
This
whatever.
is census, yes.
Yeah,
Census.
are they including people living in their ADUs?
Census.
You define ADU.
Additional dwelling unit. And ADUs have been a big success in Canterbury. People are using them more and more. We're seeing some multi-generational households where the older folks move into an ADU and the younger folks take over the big house. Yeah.
I just want to clarify, if you don't know what an ADU is. In Canterbury, if you have a house, that is, the primary use of that house is as a residence. It is the law in Canterbury, and now in the state of New Hampshire as well, that any primary residence, if it meets certain guidelines, is allowed to add an additional unit that is a separate living unit. So basically, if you have a single-family home, you can turn your basement into an apartment and legally rent it. People should make note of the fact, though, in the town of Canterbury right now, you're supposed to go to the zoning board and get a special exception for that. And for that reason, a lot of people haven't been to the town to tell them that they have an ADU. So we do not have a very accurate number of how many ADUs there are in town now. It has been very successful. It's a way for people to help pay their taxes, for example. You know, you rent out an apartment for $500 a month, and you'll be able to meet your property taxes. So that's what we're talking about. And ADUs are also a great way to have lower cost housing for people in the community.
The question of whether somebody who's living in an ADU is going to be counted as their own household versus as part of the primary houses is probably not something that there's going to be a 100% consistent answer to. That's going to be down to how those people see the household, and we're not going to have any knowledge or control over how people fill out their census forms.
Although it is moving more and more in that direction as the town is getting better at recording what is going on through the assessing process. This gentleman?
So, as somebody who's like right in that middle demographic there, what does the planning board see, or can it seems to me like there is a little bit of a gap between the two extremes here, between the very young families and the families that have lived here forever. And as you mentioned earlier, both of those may have conflicting goals, and whether that be just wanting to live at peace and not be bothered, to wanting to have really good school choices. I mean, those are wildly different. So from a planning board's perspective and the master planning, is there a way that you can maybe sum up what you guys see as those two groups? What are the pain points that both groups are really concerned with, just as a way to kind of communicate a little bit of, like,
Sure.
so each side can kind of know what each group is maybe looking at?
Well, let's talk about two extremes. One is I'm retired, I'm living on a fixed income, I'm just barely making it. Anything that makes my tax go up is a non-starter. I've got two kids, they're really smart, I want more AP classes. I got a kid who's a great athlete, I want more sports. The school budget is a very big part of our town budget.
Yeah.
So those things, you know. Yes, sir.
Can I get a piece of pizza?
Anybody else wants to say question? Salvin.
With the demographics, you guys keep referring to the 2020 census. I think, I have no cell service here, so I apologize. Sunday on WR, they reported that Merrimack County is the third fastest growing county in the state, and New Hampshire is the fastest growing state in New England. They're seeing a 20-some-odd% increase in population. So I think we're seeing a connect with what this woman over here said in terms of people who move to town that aren't accounted for. Is there any way for the next meeting we can get that 4-year gap or a more accurate number as opposed to going off 2020 pre-COVID numbers? Is that possible?
Well,
So I haven't seen those numbers.
Because MUR had about 11% in Merrimack County, and it's tripling. And then Rockingham and Hillsborough, this was 2024, reported Sunday. So I'm just curious.
So the ACS data, which is the American Community Survey, and that could be the data they're referring to.
Okay.
And we'll go take a look at the most recent iteration of the ACS data and bring it back to the next meeting. The 2020 census data are good data because it's directly comparable to pre-census data. The ACS data, it's this rolling average thing that the Census Bureau tries to do a better job because 10 years is a long time. We'll go take a look at those data. I haven't seen that, honestly. And you're right, there does appear to be an awful lot of units in the Concord area that are in the planning board process, but we haven't seen those housing starts.
We've seen some of them down at the training yard there. Those are
I would say that, the things that I have seen for the numbers, there has been a increase in New Hampshire overall, generally driven by in-migration from Massachusetts.
Yeah, we take up 57% of the immigration.
But we are, unfortunately dying a little faster than we are having kids born in New Hampshire. So we have seen that in-migration. I haven't seen numbers like that though. So we'll both track those numbers down.
Because they're curious if we could use those to manipulate what we're looking at up here. You know, maybe we could use that to better change that zoning structure versus going off those 2020 numbers.
Those data are a pretty small part of all the information the planning board is using to make whatever recommendations. That's a one data point, a big data point for them for the visioning sessions and the survey and that feedback that they got. So, but we will definitely take a look and see if we can find the most hot off the press ACS data, and then look at that critically, because the Census Bureau was disinvested in, and it's not the same Census Bureau that was, 20 years ago.
So Calvin, comes back to the development, and we're talking about the same thing here, the development pressure on us are great. And if we don't have a way of dealing with those development pressures in a way that works for Canterbury, those development pressures are going to happen in a way that we don't have that much input on. The trend, especially in New Hampshire, has been in legislation and in the courts has been toward more property right, more development right, less regulation. And so regulation needs to be justifiable. We need to be saying there's a real reason for it. One, some of them are really obvious. If you can't have a septic system, well, you really shouldn't be building a house there. If it's a lake, you really shouldn't be having a house there. There are other things that are a lot, you get beyond that and it's not so black and white. And so what is a justifiable reason for saying you can't put, some people say the 5-acre minimum. If a developer wanted to challenge that and had a lot of money to do it, they could probably get around it because you can't justify it with septic systems. The way we justify it is with our capital improvement plan, expanding services by a 2%, a small amount, and then saying we can't support more development, that we're limiting it to that. This gentleman?
I just want to kind of point out that from what you heard, we talked a lot about zoning and adding more houses, but another thing that was brought up that I could not find much about within the plan as it stands right now and objectives is improving infrastructure. I mean, that's something, why are we talking about adding more houses, just saying that it's going to increase the tax money coming in when the infrastructure is, I know some people who don't have internet at this point because they can't get it. I come in to drop my kids off at school every morning and there's people walking on the road out here with their dogs. I mean, the infrastructure is not there to continue to make this the community that we want it to be, especially as we add more people in. So I'm just wondering why the plan has no infrastructure.
So the plan for tomorrow does have an infrastructure chapter. It is not on, I don't know if you all know, the draft of the master plan is a link to it is up on the website. You can write it out. You can take pictures of the actual link if you want it.
It's also on Facebook.
It's also Facebook, yes, and it's been out on the town email as well. The chapter that isn't there because we are behind is the infrastructure chapter.
Originally, I would say too, that in the visioning session, infrastructure improvements was a topic, and internet in particular came up. So those were things that were definitely part of the recommendation.
Especially the internet issue, which strangely is not something the town has real control over. It's the private companies that are supplying it. The town has been, it's selectmen have been working on this for a long time, trying to twist the arm of the providers to get service to the places that need it.
There's actually been a bit of a breakthrough with that as well. So there are definitely gaps in town for your coverage, and it seems like some of the funding that has come down through the infrastructure bill is going to work its way to Canterbury, and that's to fill in those gaps. I would imagine the selectmen have been working on that, and hopefully that's in the next year or 18 months that some of those gaps are filled in, or all those gaps.
I believe they'll all be filled in. There's 225 gaps, people that have service at this point. So they are out there now. If you see trucks working, that's who's doing the work.
Well, that's good news. Yes.
Has there been consideration over what it might look like if there is a shift to cluster developments and more housing, and then in the next decade, assuming the potential housing market crash and potential turnover with such a big discrepancy between younger and older people in town, what that might look like in terms of filtering more families and then on top of building more housing for younger families or retirees? What would that look like?
Right, and that is, when I referred to the boom in the 80s, the boom bust cycle in the 80s, I think that's what you're talking about, if we get a bust cycle. Two things. One is we're limiting the overall growth so that we don't get 100 units. We get, 3%, the maximum units we can possibly get is 30. The number that has been the number of building permits for residents that have been given out for the last 20 years has not come even close to the 3% limit. Now, there's more pressure. Maybe we will become closer to that 3% limit. I want to address, you say low income. The economics of Canterbury are never going to allow a developer to build low income housing. The numbers don't work. We are talking about some more affordable housing. Say there is a development that puts in 6 units. Now we have developments like this. Heflon Road was one. Canterbury, what's it called?
Cambridge Drive.
Cambridge Drive is one. There's a little one on Wyven Road. So if we were to approve a development of, say, 6 units, we would be encouraging the developer to put in 1 unit that was more affordable. I'd like to think that a young person who was teaching at Canterbury Elementary is single who lives in a small unit. So build some small units as well as your 4-bedroom, 3-bedroom, and 2-bedroom units. So that there is a place for a retiree who lives on fixed income. But we're not talking about a large amount of low-income housing all clustered together. That's not something that that's something we're definitely not interested in. I looked at a cluster I met a woman who told me she was living in Gilmanton. I asked where, and she said there is a kind of cluster development behind behind the pub at the Four Corners, 107 and 140. So I drove up to look at it. Beautiful old farmstead. So they've done something with it, a little bit like Canterbury Hall. It's a beautiful property. It's got 3 apartments in it. It's got actually single room occupancy for 8 or 9 people. And it's beautifully managed. It's beautifully maintained. This place in Gilmanton, the main building main farm buildings are broken up into 3. I didn't walk through it. I walked around it. So whether it's 3 units or 2 units, or I'm not sure. Then there are a couple, there are 2 small, 2-family units. Looks like maybe a one bedroom and a two bedroom, and one bedroom and two bedroom. Then there's another house that's part of this development. It's a huge house. They've got a horse barn and a riding rink. Ring. So it seems to me that this kind of mix of different stuff, looking and well, it's a mixed use. It's much more vibrant than a place that has all of one kind of people involved in it.
Check something here, so I think I can answer what she's actually
Yep.
trying to get at. So, Canterbury is not going to solve the state's housing crisis. We're literally not there. That's not what we're trying to address here. What we're trying to address is more along the lines of people who are, say, they've got kids who are growing up and the kids want to live here. Or they've got, people who are aging but want to be able to retire here. Or it could be like the police officer from Canterbury that I talked to during the fair who told me that he was driving in from Massachusetts every day. Like, our police and teachers should not be driving in from Massachusetts. They should be able to live here. So when we're talking about, finding ways to build more workforce affordable housing and finding ways to put, a little bit more housing in a smaller area, those are the problems that we're trying to solve. We're trying to get people's kids to be able to stay living here, their parents to be able to stay living here, the people who work here to be able to live here. So we're not trying to build an amount of housing that's going to then be unnecessary if there's a bus cycle. We're trying to just have enough for the people who really want to live.
And I hear that and I appreciate that. My house as it stands now, I would not be able to afford. 4 years ago I did, and that's part of our economy and the housing market. So that's kind of where I'm coming at in terms of if we're increasing all these options and then the market's naturally going to shift and we might have an overturning of houses. We might be looking at, we're doubling up on both sides. That would be my concern with a school that's approaching 20 kids max enrollment that we're able to sustain in addition to it.
The school has a lot fewer kids in it than it did when I was in it, which is interesting.
So I want to go back to something, it's going to address some of the school stuff, but the gentleman over there had mentioned the difference between those who are retirees or those with younger families or those with children. So and the comment was a difference between someone living on a fixed income and those who want AP classes and all kinds of sports. And I want us to think about that that's not what we're talking about here, in my opinion. We're talking about, I totally agree with the enrollment decline, but I will tell you, the school board had to add another teacher this year because of the enrollment in Canterbury, which is now like up for the budget this year. So when you bring in more, it's not about adding an AP class, it's about, you will have to add teachers back to that school, which then you said the school drives the budget. You didn't say it quite like that, but essentially. So I just want us to think about those pieces, because it's not the, oh, I want all these AP classes, so bring those in. We're talking about our school in Canterbury, and just be aware of that. And then the second thing is, and I'm just a little confused, so now I'm going to ask for clarification. Are we trying to attract those who are single and or starting out and want to stay in the area, or are we attracting young families, or are we doing both? Like, I'm unclear what type of housing we are looking to bring in, because I'm hearing conflicting things. So I don't know if it's multiple.
I don't think we're trying to attract anybody. I think we're trying to accommodate people.
Say it again?
We're trying to accommodate people. We're not trying to attract people. We don't have a target population type that we want food in Canterbury. It's never been a part of our discussion.
It's that there's people who want to live here who can't, because
Right.
there's no place for them to.
Well, I couldn't buy my house either, and I have a really small house, so, So I guess when we look at development, I'm just saying, I just wanna caution us to not think like somebody wants the moon and the other is the fixed income, and then when we bring in more housing, it will, depending on the type of housing that is built, people will move in. So we do have to think about, we may not be trying to retract, we're certainly trying to accommodate, but we're gonna have to balance that between the infrastructure. And if we don't know what we're shooting for, I don't know what we're building.
Greg? Go ahead, Rick, can I add something to that? You heard Mike talk about the visiting sessions, and this happened a long time ago, right? So this was input from the town, citizens. And then I'm recently elected to the planning board, and I ran on to the cluster development and these different ideals. And what we are hearing is a lot, there's a certain segment of the population that is having a very difficult time living or staying in Canterbury. The biggest populations are those college-age students that have just graduated, brought up in Canterbury, want to come back. The other avenue is, where I'm headed, is we'll get retirement. I'm looking to downsize, but I want to stay here. I don't need 3 bedrooms anymore.
Right.
So we heard it loud and clear from the public that is where we'd like you to focus on. We don't want to react. Concord is got a lot of development going on there, and then once we get a developer in our front yard or whatever, they're moving forward faster than we can take and write out any ordinances so what we are doing here is coming up with a way possibly to solve some of the problems, address the problems that we've heard from the citizens in town, and be proactive, not reactive, to the rules and regulations that we can enforce. Does that make sense?
Okay, it does. I mean, I just think we have to recognize everybody in this room is also a citizen who's involved.
So, we're not here trying to defend this, this is a listening.
No, I know.
This is to provide input from you guys. We're not trying to dram this down anybody's throats or anything. These are listening sessions so that we can get people to comment and add concerns and stuff like that.
Ms. Nelson?
Yeah, I just also want to add that the planning board has different ways of approaching projects, and the zoning board also. And one of the things we're talking about doing is using a process called conditional use permitting. And what that means is that each project comes in, and then the whole community can come in and comment on that project before it's approved. And things can happen, like people can say, that project's gonna dump 16 more children into the school system, that's not gonna work. Or that project is gonna have a lot of people at the end of life, and we can't afford the ambulance system. So what we're trying to do is make sure that we have a way as a board and to keep the whole community involved in every project that comes through. So we always hear how it's gonna affect people and whether or not people want that to happen. And we can say no. We can say that's not gonna work. We're not gonna give you a permit for that because we've heard from the community that it's gonna be too much on our resources. So we wanna make sure that everybody understands that this board is here to listen always. And sometimes we might vote in a way that people aren't gonna like, but this is the public process. The meetings are open and people always can come in and always testify and say what they think.
So I attended the visioning session, I think it was over a year ago, and I've been to a few of these, and one thing that I'm hearing from everyone is that we really like the small town feel. We really like our small class sizes in Canterbury. But at every single session, someone has revealed themselves, and I applaud them for revealing themselves this way, to having land they want to develop. And one thing they've all said is they no longer live here. So that's something to keep in mind, is that people moved to this town, they appreciated what Canterbury was, they enjoyed it, and now they want to develop all this land and leave us to deal with that, when that's the reason we want to live here too.
judgment. Right,
It was just an observation of what I've
trying to
seen.
digest that,
They have though, like all of them, whether they've said that they, I've got land here and like we lived here for 20-something years and we moved on, but we kept this property because we want to develop it later.
Right.
I love the conditional use that she talked about because that does give us opportunity to speak up.
Right.
But you guys talk about getting pressure for development, so will it be considered?
We feel the pressure. We do. Anybody that's come down, we've had we denied an application to put in 125 units. It's not what the town wants. It's not what how we want to shape the ordinance. But even though a person has moved away, they still have a property right. And so we're trying to, and if you've moved away, maybe you need the money from exercising your property right. So that is a large part of the dilemma and a large part of the pressure that we're all feeling and trying to get a handle on to make it happen in a way that works for our community. David?
Yeah, my personal fantasy is, and I have an active fantasy life like that. Yes, if we do housing, if we choose to try to add some more housing in some way, it will be done in the Canterbury way. That's the way we just have dealt with the store, and we have a good track record of this sort of thing. That's the way the Spruces were done a long time ago. I don't know if people remember how that started out. Definitely started out being done the Canterbury way by just an ad hoc group. And so that way we get together with the people who want to work on it and see if the support is there from the other people. So it's a group effort. One thing I've run into talking to people though is that occasionally I feel like they mix up Section 8 housing and affordable housing. That they're two. Affordable housing is, it's a general term, but Section 8 is what is like Canterbury Trust for Community Housing does, with a huge amount of services for the people they put in their units. And so that's not going to happen.
Yes, we don't have the infrastructure to deal with it, and it's not going to happen in the economics of development in Canterbury. Yes?
I'm kind of new to this, so I don't know the visions and what's been spoken on. I'm a little confused on the term affordable. I'm just curious if the planning board or you folks have come up with solutions to make it affordable as far as development goes. I'm a self-employed carpenter, and right now there's nothing affordable. I mean, you're looking at $300-400 a square foot. That's before you even buy land.
Yeah.
So what type of magic wand do you have to make things affordable?
We don't have a magic wand.
Do you have a magic wand? We would love one.
Share yours, please.
Where do we get one?
Affordable has an official definition, actually, correct? So that it is a certain, based
are we
on
using the correct term, I guess is what I'm trying to say? We keep saying affordable, and right now there's nothing affordable for any financial.
Okay, two things. There is a term affordable housing, right?
Well, affordable housing itself is kind of a generic term, but like you said, Section 8 housing, the federal government has a range of what they call affordable. Section 8 housing is like 30%, I think, of the average median income. If you make that, then you can qualify. That's not what the planning board's talking about.
Yeah, I'm not speaking to that.
Right. Well, then so this is a different problem. You're talking about how to make housing less expensive for someone like yourself. Or, so that's part of what the cluster is about. Part of it is protecting open space and green space, but a way of reducing the way our zoning is, if 5-acre minimum, 300-foot frontage requires the building of a great amount of road to get any number of units, right? The affordable housing, the cluster allows it to be concentrated and probably reduces cost of that development by a very significant amount. So but we only have tools. We can't tell somebody you've got to make an affordable house. That's one tool. What are other tools we have to make things
So I think the most straightforward one is the ADU.
Right, the ADU. Yeah.
So Hillary was talking a little bit earlier about, the accessory dwelling units, but one way to make it easier to develop one of those is to make it a permitted use versus having to go through the special exception process. That slows people down, time is money, but it keeps people away from that. So that's kind of the first kind of really straightforward way to approach more affordable housing, is to make it easier to allow for those accessory dwelling units.
Our accessory dwelling unit also is unusual in that it allows the ADU to be, it does not have to be in the primary residence. It can be a detached structure. It can be if you've got a house with a long L or something, it can be in the L. If you've got a house that used to keep llamas, you can turn it into an apartment.
Didn't they be Airbnbs?
Airbnb is a separate issue, and the planning board does not have the kind of control of it, as I understand.
You do have some regulations on short-term rentals, and that's something that the board could look at in the future if that's has an impact on housing.
I'm interested in your take on that. What's the feeling about Airbnbs? Whoa. Well, at least somebody's
I was
looking
just thinking, if everyone on my road put a little house in the back, like I could put a house in the back and I could make a lot of money on an Airbnb. But then we'd have more traffic and, cars pulling into neighbors' houses.
Right, it's more infrastructure, more services.
I have stories of people walking into neighbors' houses thinking it was the Airbnb.
Right. So, my name is Lisa Carlson and I live on Morrill Road. And I would love it if everyone speaking tonight would introduce themselves, because there's a lot of folks here tonight that I don't know. That's an unusual thing for me to say, but it's my truth now, because there are young families moving into town and I don't have a vehicle to meet you all. So I'd like to at least hear your name and know where you live. So can we just each say who we are and where we live?
When we
I have a concern about property owners in Canterbury who are now taking advantage of or overstepping the allowance for accessory dwelling units or short-term rentals or Airbnb. Let's be clear in our minds as we're talking about the plans for tomorrow about what does this mean to our community? Who are the people that are going to be living or dwelling in Airbnbs, short-term rentals, or accessory dwelling units? Because some of us have enough property that we can have multiple things going on our properties, and is that how we want to develop things in our town? If I have 120 acres of land and lots of woods and places to put things, different than a campground, I could have an apartment in my barn. I could have an Airbnb in the side building off my garage. I could have a short-term rental in the basement of my house. Now we have 4 entities living on one property. We need to clarify
do that legally. You can't do that within our ordinance. But I understand the concern. It sounds to me like we need to look at this and see if we can Yeah.
We do have that going on in our town.
But
It's
not
not that,
but
it's that
not-
people aren't aware of who's doing what. So there needs to be some enforcement about the ordinances we create. If
I
we vote
agree.
on these ordinances, it's because this is how we want to live here. But who's going to enforce that?
So if the planning board is not in charge of enforcement, select board is in charge of enforcement. There, in my opinion, for many years, we have had inadequate enforcement on many of these things. In my experience in the last few years, enforcement has been much better. That doesn't mean it's perfect, but I don't know, Mike, do you have any suggestions on our way for us to better address this in the ordinance?
I think, well, so state law requires accessory dwelling units to be allowed within any zoning district that allows us for single family. So that was a change that surprised many of us. You guys had it in your ordinance already, but it's baked into the state statute.
Well, we don't have it, currently it's not allowed in every zone that has allowed single family.
State law says it should.
Right.
The short-term rental issue is an issue everybody's dealing with, you know, universal. You don't have the same demand that, say, you know, the Lakes region has, but it is an issue. And it's something that communities are struggling with. And you're right, there is a clash between that availability of the ADU and that opportunity for Airbnb.
And the thing it does is it takes housing away from other people. Yes.
Nate Bragdon, neighbor leasing. It's easier to say that. So in the drafts you had for like housing, looking at statistics, one of the things that I found fascinating was that you said that basically 93% of the houses in Canterbury are owner occupied. And I find that really interesting because I feel like that's a large part of why this community is so awesome. Because the neighbors that are down the street own it. They have vested interest in them. And I see that from all of my neighbors, that it's very unusual. I came from Fairfield, before that I was in Franklin. And it's definitely when you start to have disassociation of the ownership of the property and actually living in the community, in my experience, that's when you start seeing the shape of the town change. And my only offer to the planning board is you're considering whether it be updates to zoning regulations or updates to adding in clusters or whatever else, is to have that in mind to how can we maintain that the dwellers have a stake in the community. And I'm not saying that renters don't have stakes in the community as well. They have these stakes, but when you own the property, you by its nature have a much more vested interest in making sure that property taxes stay at a reasonable level for everybody involved, that services are maintained. It's just you're going to buy that vested nature. So if I can just offer that as we're looking at these, to maintain that kind of philosophy, I think that will help to keep a lot of the amazing charm and the community that we have.
So we've had personal experience with that, with absentee landlord, and I 100% agree with you. In fact, the ADU ordinance that we have requires, if you're going to have an ADU that's occupied, that the owner occupy either the ADU or the primary home. So that, it's in the ordinance. It needs enforcement, again, as Lisa said, is an issue. We're aware of that, and there are other, there's certain things that somebody's got a house and they move and they want to rent the house. We don't have the authority, I don't believe, to tell them they can't do that. But Mike, any thoughts on that, Matt?
You were talking about short-term rentals?
No, the authority, if I own a house and I move to Washington DC and say I want to rent my house.
No, I don't think you do that.
There's no legal way to say no.
Right.
understand that. It's just more along the lines, like, as you said, you're trying to balance that right of the property owner to do what they want with their property, but also to not infringe on the neighbor's rights as well. And all I'm suggesting is, as you were framing these updated zoning ordinances, that stays as a tenet, that we're going to try to maximize the ownership in the town. That's all I'm suggesting. So A's are right there.
You know, that's at odds a little bit with demography. Younger people want to rent and not be owners.
Sure.
And I don't know where that goes.
Well, I suspect more of that is to the earlier comment that right now a lot of housing is just flat out not in the affordable range for where they can do it. So a lot of younger buyers aren't even considering, they're not even considering that in the same manner, just because the affordability of just a very basic house is so high right now. It's very difficult to get that entry into there. So I suspect that has more to do with it than not. But I'll tell you, I've got 4 kids. A lot of you guys know my kids, and I've only been in the town for a few years now. But I do have concerns that my kids are either going to A, have to stay at home, which I'm not really looking for that, or B, they're going to have to move out of town, and because it's just not going to be something affordable. My daughter's expressed her desire to move down to the apartments down the street, but I don't know if she's going to be able to, if those are going to be available or open, or, you know, so that's those things that I'm definitely interested in understanding.
Teresa?
I'm Teresa Wyman. I'm a neighbor of Greg. I live on Shaker Road. This came back again, and I was going back to what is affordable housing. You said there was a definition, but before that, this is something that my brother said probably in the 80s when that boom was happening, which was, there's a lot of Canterbury kids that live in Northfield and other places now, because the town kind of pushed them out with the zoning. Whether you agree with that or not, it was an observation.
Sorry, I didn't understand that. I'm sorry.
She said that the town zoning caused people to move to cheaper places to live.
Yeah. Well,
But my real question is, what is the definition of affordable housing?
There's not a specific definition for affordable housing, but there is a definition for workforce housing, which I looked up at one point in a planning board meeting where we were having this conversation, but effectively what it comes down to is workforce housing is reasonably affordable to people who are, you know, working the kinds of jobs like, say, the teachers at the Canterbury Elementary School. So, you know, somebody who's maybe middle income can afford to live in this house reasonably comfortably. I forget exactly how the numbers break out from that, but that's what the definition of it is. And when we're talking about affordable housing in Canterbury, what we really mean generally is workforce housing.
Calvin?
So if we keep bringing up clusters and all, you know, that sort of stuff, have you guys discussed changing frontage regulations and or flag lots? Have you tried to manipulate ways that people can utilize the land aside from cluster divisions?
Yes,
Flag lots.
Flag lots.
If you got 350 feet, right, 300 to what you need is 300, you got 30 acres, would you entertain the idea of flag lots as opposed to cluster subdivisions?
Lots. I got it. It's narrow, so this means a narrow driveway, a right of way.
Yes.
And then being able to build on the back portion. We have talked about that. We've had some resistance to the idea of it. Again, it means building a significant amount of road. So we've been trying to figure out how to make that work in the ordinance. I think we felt that if we, so what that means largely is, say I own 50 acres, or it was a big piece before, and the road frontage has been sold off. About 300 foot here, 300 foot here. Here's my house, 300 feet here, 300 feet here. I got no more frontage, but I got 40 acres in the back. So in order to develop that, we've discussed, can you do it through a right-of-way? Can you have a right-of-way driveway? Can you have a shared driveway? Can you just say, oh, well, we're going to 250-foot frontage and you can sell the other frontage to somebody else to do something, to do a flag lot development? I think as we've explored those ideas, it seems we've felt there would be quite a bit of resistance from the community on doing that. Ideas, thoughts?
I mean, I personally don't support it. I think you're opening up a huge can of worms by doing deeded right of ways. I mean, that's just a whole nightmare the town doesn't need to deal with, the landowners need to deal with. I had just heard milling around it had been discussed, and I was just trying to see where you guys stood in that discussion and how that went.
Well, we agree with you.
But they also exist in town. I can think of at least one that exists in town.
I have one.
Yeah.
Yeah, so.
It's a nightmare.
Yes?
Joanna, I live on Nottingham Road, so as a resident of Sherwood Forest, and Logan and Kent cleared up some of my questions around that, but I haven't heard, like, when you're talking about a cluster, I haven't really heard anything about the size of lots or what that's actually gonna look like. And from the perspective of a homeowner who has heard in the past, not necessarily from the town, but from other residents who knew what you were getting into, when you're getting your first house, no, you don't.
That's for sure.
We're stuck with, Logan expressed that you're trying to avoid another Sherwood Forest situation. But also on that, as having to run an association there, if you have cluster housing and you're talking about sharing a septic or sharing a well, things like that, that would be a burden on the residents. And is there an idea of having a management company actually run that? Because it honestly is a nightmare to run it as a resident.
I agree with you 100%, which is the cluster development has a requirement that there is, that the lots are deeded, have deeded responsibility to a homeowners association, and the homeowners association
That's what I'm getting at.
maintains. But the important thing is it is a deeded commitment so that you can't just say, I'm not gonna pay.
Well, that's what I'm getting at. That deeded or not, you're still not gonna get your money and it's really hard to collect it. And what I'm suggesting is if there was the tool for it in a cluster, that actually be something that's required to be run by a company. That can follow that, because at that point you have neighbors taking neighbors to court to get money.
I know, it's a nightmare.
And that's not a good way to go.
That's one of the problems with your neighborhood is that it doesn't have the homeowners association doesn't have assessment authority, and I think we wrote into the proposed ordinance that there be assessment authority, deeded assessment authority, so you don't have that problem. But Sherwood Forest was done in 1960 or something.
And just saying it's hard to get the money and people just won't pay. And
the way it was set up was a terrible burden on the homeowner, on the property owner.
And you don't want to fight with neighbors.
You folks are finally starting to get it straightened out, and I commend your efforts. Yes.
Hi, Doris Hampton on Borough Road. Greg, are we talking about with cluster homes, talking about purchase, or is there any talk with cluster homes about something where you would rent your facility?
We had a little bit of this discussion
I
a few
missed some,
minutes.
I'm sorry.
No worries, we had two parts to this meeting. I don't think we can, if somebody, oh yes, let's pass these out this one.
It seems like we're moving to clusters, so I'm gonna hand out a handout about clusters.
I don't think we can, if somebody owns property, we can't say you can't rent it, right? Or can?
Right, if somebody has a property and they want to rent it, and they can do something. Do you want me to, I have a comparison, the handout that's going around. On the second page, there's kind of a comparison between what you have now in your ordinance, which is called cluster residential development, versus some of the things that the planning board has been talking about, the potential changes. Is that, do you want me to go through those?
Well, let's let people get them, and maybe there's a bit of time to get this, if you want something.
We're on the second page, well, actually it's the third page if you count the cover, but it's the picture of Canterbury Shaker Village, which I think is really, that picture really illustrates what a cluster neighborhood could be under ideal circumstances. And so I just wanted to compare what's in the ordinance now versus what are some ideas that the planning board has had for changes to the ordinance. Did you want to take questions or while?
No, I would like, you were,
I can keep going.
Keep going, please. Explain so on the left-hand side, describes what we have.
Yeah, the top is the existing cluster residential development ordinance, and below is ideas that the planning board has had. And these are just ideas, and that's why we're here tonight, is to get feedback on these ideas. So in your existing ordinance for cluster, it allows a reduction in the minimum lot size to an acre, but it requires the same density that would be required for a traditional subdivision. It also allows a reduction in minimum road frontage for lots within a cluster to 100 feet. And it sets setbacks for those individual lots at 50 feet on the front, 25 feet on the sides. There's actually in your ordinance, there's a 200-foot buffer requirement as well on the front of the parcel. You don't have a minimum tract size set for the cluster development right now. And one of the big things that kind of a disincentive, I guess, if you will, to use the cluster development ordinance now is it requires that you meet town road standards, and it's kind of set up so if somebody did propose a cluster residential development under this ordinance, they would be proposing a town road and potentially looking for acceptance of that. Your current ordinance allows for 6 attached units, and it does require for any attached units, they would have to go to the zoning board of adjustment, and there's a setback requirement for 100 feet from any attached unit structure from a residence, so there's a 100-foot setback.
So hard to understand.
It's kind of all over the place. So I think that's one of the reasons why the board thought about redoing the ordinance altogether, coming up with some ideas that might fit, and also ideas that came out of the Plan for Tomorrow visioning sessions. So I guess the first big change is there was a proposal to rename it to cluster neighborhoods, and I think that, and that's still under discussion, I think.
Yes, it is. The Conservation Commission actually I met with them last week and are supportive of this idea because it protects green space. So we're talking about protecting at least 50% of the lot is public access green space. If it's in the residential zone, to boost that to 60. If it's in the rural zone, and to boost it even higher if it's in the ag conservation zone.
So some things that the planning board's talked about is where there's a minimum tract size for a cluster development now. There's discussion about setting a minimum tract size of at least 10 acres. The idea would be to potentially allow additional density in some places to protect that green space. And to increase, as Greg mentioned, to increase open space requirements, particularly for sensitive areas. The big change, and at least what's being discussed, is the road standards. And I do want to talk a little bit about road standards, but with the proposal as it stands now is the roads for cluster development would be private, and they wouldn't necessarily meet town road standards, but they would have to meet a standard that would be determined by the planning board and a consulting engineer. So it does offer relief, and that in itself has a big impact on the cost of housing. The cost of constructing a road is huge. And I guess maybe this is a good time, I'll flip ahead to the town road standards, because in looking at the next page, that first paragraph is what you have in your subdivision regulations for road standards. And the road standards basically refer to state of New Hampshire standard specifications for road and bridge construction. And also there's a reference to a latest edition of the AASHTO, which is the American Association of State Highway and Transportation Officials, a policy on geometric designs on highways and streets. Those are your road standards now. They don't sound like they fit Canterbury. I will tell you, when I looked for the AASHTO standards, I went to a website, and I would have had to pay $400 to get the book to look at that. So I didn't do that. But what I can tell you is those standards, I don't think that you probably have many roads in town that meet those standards. And those are the town standards for new roads.
And I think can I pick up on that for a minute? Some of you, I think one example is Welch Road, where a new house was built further down the road. The current subdivision, or this current standard the town uses to issue a new building permit on a private road or a Class 6 road is that the developer must bring that up to the town Class 5 standard. Now, we have a lot of roads in town that are town roads that don't actually meet the Class 5 standard. What the point here is, we're feeling that maybe that Class 5 standard is too strict a standard. It's requiring too much clearing, too much modifications. It's not looking like Canterbury Road. So we're talking about making it so, although we must have adequate emergency access, of course, we're thinking that we can possibly have a less onerous road standard that can still serve the emergency needs of a residence and be less ugly.
I just got to mention, talking about Shaker Village and making a correlation with the cluster development is complete nonsense. That was a working, thriving community within itself. And what are you going to do in your warrant article? Say this cluster development, one of the requirements is celibacy? I mean, let's be serious.
Well, I think where it's a good example, and if you look at the picture of those cluster homes,
It
those
was a
homes,
working, thriving community.
right,
It
no, I
wasn't a cluster.
understand that.
It wasn't a development.
I
It's
understand
nonsense,
that,
is what it is.
but there were, none of those houses that are shown in that picture would have met the minimum road frontage requirements that the town requires now. They wouldn't have met the setbacks, they wouldn't have met the distance between structures, so I use that as an example. You're right, it was that, Canterbury Shaker Village was a mixed-use village. It wasn't just residential, but the houses, the way they were placed, you couldn't do that today. You couldn't build Canterbury Village today under the current town regulations. So that's the only point that I was trying to make. Yes, you did. So, but on the road standards, I think having that one size fits all really it prevents the planning board, it prevents construction of roads and pathways that really fit with the character of Canterbury. That was really the better point. So another thing that the planning board has talked about is, in one of the things that came out in the visioning session for tomorrow, is the importance of character. And that was I think the most common theme that we heard is people want to preserve the character of Canterbury, the agricultural heritage, the historic charm. And so the planning board, in looking at ways to achieve that, talked about potentially giving incentives that are based on design. When I say incentives, I mean potentially if somebody was doing like 10 units, they potentially could get an additional unit. Not like huge incentives, but to encourage construction of stone walls, preservation of stone walls, open fields, the things that really make Canterbury what it is and really make the character of.
Okay, let me back up a minute because there was a question about what is the density allowed. And it is a little confusing. It took me a little while to get an understanding of it. Say you have 50 acres in a zone that has a 5-acre minimum lot size. Well, the density then is 10 homes, right? Because 10 times 5 is 50. All right. Our current zoning and most zoning say, well, but you got 10 acres of wetland over there that can't be used, so you can't count that. Right, you can't count that. So so you're down from 10 units to 8 units. So say we're working with 8 units, and we put them in a cluster, and then if the developer agrees to maintaining, to doing traditional buildings that have a traditional look to them, maybe you can get one additional unit. Rather than having 8, maybe you can get 9. Calvin?
A unit you're referring to as so for a duplex, that's 2 units.
That's
So if we-
correct.
if we
Yes,
had
a
10
dwelling
units,
unit,
five
a dwelling
dwelling
unit,
units.
yes. You
Okay.
can't put up a 6-unit building.
No, I'm
and
just
say-
clarifying for people who might think it's gonna be 10 houses versus it could be 5 duplexes.
Right,
versus-
correct, yes, yes, that's an important thing to be clear about. Gentleman behind there?
You said you were being pressured by people to get this project underway. How much pressure are you being put under to get these things done and organized?
For the planning board?
Yeah, you
Okay,
said
the
you were
planning
under
board
pressure.
is,
People are pressuring you.
The state recommends that we do a new master plan every 10 years. It's been 12 years or 13 years since the last one was done. So we are behind on that. And what the plan for tomorrow, the master plan, is important because it supports the capital improvement plan. It supports all ordinance, any ordinances should be consistent with the goals of the master plan.
So do you have developers that are looking directly at you, contacting you?
We had one developer coming in wanting to put in 125 units.
What about developers that want to put in less?
Well, it was easy to say no to 125 units because it doesn't apply to our zoning board.
Right.
If a developer comes in with a project that complies with our zoning, we basically cannot say no, except we have a building permit cap. So if we're approaching the cap, then we can say, no, you gotta wait till next year.
So is Concord pushing the sprawl on you?
I don't know what is pushing that huge amount of development in Concord, and my feeling is it's gonna make a boom bust cycle. The state, well, you were talking demographics, Calvin, was it Calvin, or just talking about the increase in population in Merrimack County is having a huge population increase.
Well, I'm just saying, I didn't come here because Canterbury was affordable. You keep saying, let's make things affordable, you know? What is the basis of making things affordable that ruins everything around it? You allow somebody to put their toe in the door, and you're gonna get more than you bargained for, all right? Because the first person that does it, there's gonna be a second person, and there's gonna be a third person, there's gonna be a fourth person. You already said that you allowed some of these people to do it. Well, they're back. To build cluster houses, and to build.
We have cluster developments that were built in the 1950s, in the 1970s, that were, and they weren't under a regulation. That's part of the reasons we have the cluster regulation went in 10 years ago to help to prevent that kind of thing.
Well, it's back, and it's front and center. And now, Concord is getting their nose into it, and they're gonna put pressure on you. Why don't you just build a 7-Eleven right next to the store and get it over with?
I don't feel pressure from Concord. I think what you do is like the state government. But I do from, like the gentleman in the back, he can't afford a place in Concord, in Canterbury, or from, just, you know, my kids can't afford a place in Canterbury. And the elementary school, if you have people who can afford Canterbury, it's gonna be older people, and then they won't have children, and the elementary school will fail.
Well, Canterbury is not a gift, first of all right? I couldn't afford Canterbury. If you have to leave your hometown and go out and work to be able to afford to move back to your hometown, so be it. Everybody has to do it. You don't have a right to live here. You have to earn it.
Well said.
All right? You don't get to live in Canterbury just because that's your wish or that's your dream. All right? You don't.
I don't disagree with you, but I think that's where the pressure comes from.
Well, there shouldn't be pressure then. That's the statement. You work for what you yet. You don't get it given to you. Here, take this.
So we're not, nobody's saying we want to have subsidized housing. What we're saying is if you have, we're encouraging to have a mix of housing, that there's some expensive housing, there's some medium housing, and there's a little bit of housing that a young person who's teaching at the school can maybe live in. There's a policeman here, we have policemen who are traveling in from Massachusetts. It would be good for them to have a small unit that they could live in.
That's not
Or
doable. You
people
know
who
it's
are
not
retiring, who don't want to have to move out of the town they've lived in their entire life.
doable. Then don't retire. All right?
I mean, you are free to make that choice for yourself, but other people might want other options.
But why should the people in the town suffer because other people want? One person makes that option.
We're trying to do it in a way that doesn't make people suffer.
Also, we'll go to the town for a vote. There'll be a warrant article that comes before the town. And if the town chooses not to change the zoning, it won't happen. So if you see the article and you think this is a really bad idea, it's your right as a citizen of the town to really rally your other like-minded people to go vote against it. It's a democracy. And the other thing is that we're afraid of pressure of someone with a lot of money coming in, buying a big acreage and saying, I want to do what I want to do here, and I got big money, and I'm going to hire lawyers, and I'm going to crush your town. If we don't have an ordinance that can address that, we get crushed. So we're trying to come up with something that's defensible, that won't change the nature of the town, but will keep us from having a giant development come in.
That's.
But we'll have a property rights, right?
You open the door to it, and you're gonna have much more development than you can handle. You let the first person in. You didn't like it the last time, it sounds. You won't like it any better this time because building standards and qualities have gone down considerably.
Since 6 months ago?
Let's take this young lady, please.
Hi, I'm new to town and recently bought a property on Airbnb Road. I'd just like to say that I think both of you made really good points, and having moved from Auburn where we've seen some of the things that you have talked about, the idea that if you let a developer in here, you'll have housing that so you could afford, or the retirement community could afford, is absolute crap. Those in Auburn today, the houses are really sky high. Cluster developments were allowed in. We're seeing shortages of water, people's wells failing because there's insufficient water resources to support these cluster developments. The taxes are going sky high. The road maintenance is terrible. The developers say they're going to create roads for these clusters that will actually meet a good standard. And in Auburn, the town does take the roads on. It sounds like we're not thinking about that here. But, these things all cost a ton of money. And then in addition to that, there are a ton of other resources and infrastructure in order to support these clusters that will have to come into town. So, while I recognize that, there is a need for people to have, houses that they can afford and should be able to do stuff with their property. I think the town has to be really careful about the size of these developments, the acreage they're on. We had terrible drainage issues. It cost me thousands of dollars to fix bad drainage. Now that's my fault because I didn't know enough to ask the right questions. But I don't want people in this town or new people coming into town to suffer those consequences. We have undercapitalized developers coming in, trying to make a fast buck and screwing everyone over. So I think the town has to be very careful about the kinds of developers they allow into town and what you have, in your town.
That's why we're trying to.
New Hampshire?
Yes. That is why we're trying to improve the existing regulations, is so that we can minimize as many of those problems as possible.
Yeah, and making it be a terrible drainage issue. And I saw in some of the minutes something about an agricultural village. Village is a euphemism for a tiny cluster with people that are very unhappy later on. So, you know.
Teresa?
I already said it, I'm Teresa Wyman, I live on Faithful Road, and I would like to know why, how can I say this? All of us work, most of us work. Some people make more money than others. Does that allow the demographic of this town to be only wealthy people? I use myself as an example. I'm a registered nurse, which is somebody that's often referred to in workforce housing. I worked hard my whole career. For a while, I worked weekends. I was working 12-hour shifts, took one day off and worked the 2 weekend days, and spent 5 days working with the carpenters to build my house. Do I not deserve to live in this town? Did I not work hard enough?
Nobody said that.
You implied it very much. If you go out and get a job and...
I would love to see everybody live in this job, in this town. There's nothing that I'm saying that isn't factual. If you work hard, you choose where you want to live. You chose Canterbury. I'm happy for you. Why wouldn't you be happy living here?
So I don't understand why you don't want more affordable housing in this town.
Because, first of all, if they could afford to live here, you wouldn't be doing things cheaper. So they can live here.
Okay, so.
You come in, you buy a plot of land.
Excuse me, sir.
You build on it.
Please address the board.
Yeah, please
Okay.
address the
She
board.
asked me the question.
Yes.
Please address the board.
Well, I am, I just did. I
Just
addressed, you know, who's talking to us?
She's addressing him, too.
She asked
Yes,
me
she
the
did.
question.
You will.
So why would you
Everyone
want
to
to
address
answer
the
her
board.
personally? She asked me a personal
Okay.
question.
So let's move on.
Does
This
the board
gentleman
have a
over here,
question
please.
for me? If the board has a question for me, I'll address the board. How would you like to handle it?
I don't have a question for you, sir.
All right.
Can we move on, please?
Hi, Jim Miller on Baptist Road. I don't know if we have good statistics on the mix of housing sizes through town. If we do, that would be really good to know. My impression is that based on the aging of the population that's been here a while, and some of the more recent houses that have been built, we may be tilting more towards larger structures.
I believe we do have these numbers, but we don't have them
In,
on the table.
actually, in the handout on demographics, there is a graph called housing stock by type. It's on, I believe, like the fourth page, I think, that's the fifth page. And that shows the breakdown. It doesn't really address size per se, it just shows the breakdown between single family, multifamily, and mobile homes.
Right, so it is not where I'm going. I'm saying, you know, think about the housing. If the data bears this out, and I don't know, and maybe if we can get it together, that would be useful. As people age, as people's kids grow up and move out, you end up with, again, a lot of sort of larger homes that then at some point have to be sold. Given the current state of the housing market and the recent bizarre uptick in housing prices, those houses that were quite affordable in the context of the times 10, 20, 30 years ago, are not affordable to anyone like the kind of people who are able to buy it in the jobs that are comparable. I came to town 30-some years ago, bought a house for $130,000. It shows up on Zillow now at $500,000. I don't know anyone who could be affording that was anything like what I was when I bought it. So things have changed in that regard. In that line of thinking, if we are looking at trying to create a better mix of housing, in terms of sizes of houses, thinking not just now, but when those houses turn over, will there be people who can buy them? If we have a cluster development, and the way you've worded it currently, the draft or whatever, the lower part of that page says one or two smaller and more affordable units. One or two, it's kind of like one or two. The rest of those units, given the housing market, the pressure will be on for McMansions.
You're right.
Subject to the number that can be built in that space. Those McMansions, the property values are gonna eventually move up and down. 10, 20 years from now, those will be empty because they won't be able to be turned over to someone else. So anyway, it's just a thought that maybe we should have more than one or two in the wording? Like a higher minimum?
There are things we're not allowed to do, like say, you can only build small houses, or you can only build large houses. It's not legal for us to do that. We try to give some incentives for some smaller units. But it all keys to economics and what a developer will build, or what a person will build. If the developer is gonna make his money on the $500 houses, that's gonna be what he's gonna build. I understand your concern, and there's a lot of other people who express the same thing. Yes, sir?
Kind of touching on what he said.
As Lisa asked,
I'm sorry. My name is Alex Young. I'm from, I live on Baptist Hill Road.
Thank you.
Kind of just touching on what he said. As a carpenter, from what I've seen and talked to, the reason developers build, like I prefer a smaller house, more modest, a ranch style. You don't see a lot of those now. You see a lot of McMansions because as a developer, once you pay for that land, because land is expensive, nothing's affordable, developers are always going to build a bigger house so they can make the most money. Canterbury, I feel, Canterbury, that to me, that's not the character of, that's not the spirit of Canterbury. And I know this is a very touchy subject, but once developers come in, they will build that big house, no matter what you say. Because that's how they make money, and that's their job, is to make money.
But I think that's why we keep harping on finding ways to make sure that some more affordable housing gets built, is because people are going to build the unaffordable things no matter what. But if we try to really push them to build at least some things that are more affordable, maybe we'll get some.
I guess that's the whole, for me, that's the whole magic wand thing, is I haven't heard a lot of solutions on how we're gonna keep the spirit of Canterbury. And this, I think we really need to change the word affordable, because it's not, that's, in this current economy, there's no such thing.
Call it relatively affordable.
Or more affordable, right? I mean, the economic, as I said, no developer's gonna come in here and build a block of low-income
I
housing.
really wish there was, but there's not one in the world.
Greg. Calvin? Oh, sorry. Well, I already called on Calvin.
Sumner, go first, I'll go up to Sumner.
Okay, Sumner.
Just some, under your ideas for changes, you're calling for a mandatory homeowner association for the maintenance of common property. And I wondered if one of the things you could do there is, or an option that the person could donate that to the town, because they may not want to have a landowner association, and depending what that property is, that if you have a mandatory landowner association, they may have to get involved in managing that property they don't have any expertise or interest in doing that. Because the people that are creating this are not the people that are gonna be owning it later on.
Yes.
So if you put that in as an option to give it to the town, the other is the developer then has an opportunity to take a tax benefit of a donation from his proceeds, so that improves the bottom line for the developer.
Do you mean donate the roads to the town and then the town is?
No, the actual 50% that you have to, the bribe that you have to have the
Okay,
cluster
I've had
development.
discussions with the Conservation Commission on this, and the Conservation Commission is the one who manages most of the conservation land in town. They are not interested in taking on random bits of property all over town. And because there comes a burden of managing that and monitoring it and making sure that it's actually kept. So the other thing is it's donated to the town, it's off the tax rolls. We you know, the whole, part of the idea is the development needs to be, the tax base for that development needs to support the services, so that we're not growing houses and not growing our
But
tax base.
that open space is either gonna be under current use, or it's gonna be under a discretionary easement that's negotiated with the town, because it's gonna be open space.
Current use tax is better than no tax, is what we've been feeling.
But
The other thing is, in terms of the road maintenance and other maintenance of common properties, because there's gonna be other common property besides what's set aside as public space. This young lady was telling us about the problems at Sherwood Forest without having the right of assessment to say, okay, you gotta pay your part for the road. You can't just live there and drive on the road and not contribute.
Well, I think one of the things that would be nice is if you have a cluster development that, I mean, it'd be nice if those roads did become town roads. And when you go for that, when you go for your cluster permit, you know, I'd require the roads to be built to the town specs, and I'd have various specs for different type of developments, because you don't need to handle big trucks on some of those roads. But if you require the road to be built to town specs and require a performance bond before any house or lot is sold, you're not gonna have the problems that they had down in Auburn or someplace else, because you have a performance bond and the road is up to specs before you build houses or before you subdivide, before you do a subdivision. It has to meet that standard. And any citizen that pays taxes wants to live on a town road. They don't want the extra burden of trying to have somebody take care of their road,
So,
in my opinion.
yes, there are some people that would much rather have a private road, more like a gated community. So there is people who don't want a private road, especially if it's a class 6 road that they have to pay for maintenance, and then anybody can take their four-wheeler up and down it and tear it up or whatever.
There are some successful private roads with several houses on them in Canterbury.
The other thing I would say is, you've lived here probably close to the same amount of time, probably more years actually consecutively. I have seen this issue of the town taking on roads come to town meeting numerous times, and my feeling, there's one case where it was taken on, Cambridge Drive, I believe, but the town meeting has always just shot it down with great numbers saying no more town roads. So.
Well, you have Addis Crossing down there down in the northwest part of town. That was taken on by the town years and years ago.
Years and years, yeah. Yes, please.
My name's Joanna. I agree with Cliff. It's kind of hard to visualize what you expect this is going to look like based on Shaker Village. And is it possible before this does come to a vote that something could be actually drawn up so we can actually visualize how these houses would be spaced out, like what this would actually look like? Because
I agree, Shaker Village is an idealistic vision.
I think it would be possible to draw up an example, but there's going to be a lot of possible ways that it could look.
Yeah, so I understand, so I'm not asking, the questions that I'm bringing up isn't necessarily because I'm against it, I understand what you're doing, because I've had neighbors that said, we'll just go to the state and get what we want, and I see that that's what you're trying to prevent, but like she said, where we live, I'm really concerned about homeowners coming in and not knowing what they're getting into. If you're not gonna share septics, and they have individual septics, and those lots aren't big enough for stone and pipe versus enviros, you're setting those up, people up for a $12,000 expense in 8 to 10 years. On top of, you're not gonna give the roads to the town, which is at least, at minimum, $400 to $500 a month for the maintenance of that road. So you're adding that onto $400 a month for taxes. They're already at $900 there without paying their mortgage. So I'm really concerned about the homeowner that's gonna buy it, if you're gonna do it and it's gonna get voted on. We're not, when you're saying relatively affordable, I'm not seeing that. Like with that, I'm just hoping that if we can kind of see what that would look like, would it allow space, or can we make sure we're allowing space for proper septic and wells?
Right, so definitely any proposal that comes to the board is going to be required, they're already required to provide septic design, state-approved septic design.
The state will approve an environment, but environs are junk. And that's what, like I'm saying, these people are gonna come buy a house and not know that.
Right, I agree that's a problem. The town doesn't, it's state regulated, it is not town regulated, the septics.
So you're saying they can do it anyways?
They could do it anyway, yes. There was another part to your question?
No, I was just wondering, when you're talking about the relatively affordable, like,
Oh, I know.
it's $15,000 for someone just to come in and drag less than 3 miles of road.
Right.
So even if that's brought up to town standards, you're still talking like we can't afford to pay a contractor in the neighborhood because of the amount of money we get. So you're talking about adding that money to that person's monthly
Right,
costs.
that's why there's a
and that's
homeowners association with the right to assess and
Well,
charge
right,
people.
but I know, but are you hearing what you're saying? Because what you're basically saying is, well,
She's saying only more than well, that people are gonna be able to afford the road.
you're adding to the cost of that housing.
It is
Yeah.
adding to the cost, you're correct.
But you're saying you want you want it to be affordable. That's not gonna be affordable. That
Well,
won't be.
it's a one-bedroom place is gonna be more affordable than a four-bedroom
That's
place is
going
what we're.
And again, I'm not necessarily against this, but you're talking a one bedroom right now is $300,000. So that's on the taxes is around $4,000. So they're paying, you're gonna add that and then add the cost of everything else.
I don't have an answer about how to provide housing for
I'm just asking
a
that
lower.
that's- Yeah, I'm asking that those are taken into consideration when these guidelines are set, or when the ordinances are set, that this is being considered, and not having it as a town road. That's a huge expense for somebody.
Yes, it is.
And we're setting that up, we're saying this is what we're going to do, instead we could say it could be a town road.
You were asking about what these things look like. We have a number of cluster-like developments in town, Cambridge Drive, Heflon Road, there's a little one on the Spruces, there's a little one on Wyven Road.
Well, Cambridge Drive is more spread out, right?
Not Spruces certainly isn't. Heflon Road is how spread out is, we're not saying that they have to be side by side. The developer is going to have propose something that he thinks people are going to buy, and the board will look at it, and the public will come in and comment on it, and if a lot of people don't like it, it's not going to be approved.
Canterbury Inn.
So each development has to be approved, it's not just something that you're gonna set today, and it's just someone can come in and say, I'm gonna follow this.
No, that's the conditional approval
Every single time
process.
it is an approval.
Yes, and that includes reviewing the septics.
Okay.
Yes, please.
I just wanted to say two things. First, thank you for hosting the parent session tonight. For those of us that it's much harder to stay even when considering opportunities to vote on things, if it's at all possible, to take into consideration those of us that would need a babysitter for like my better half to even be able to be at this meeting right now, so that we can make it, that would be greatly appreciated.
So the voting will happen as part of the regular town meeting voting process, which means a few weeks before there's one set of votes that are made. And so at the Tuesday before, and then there are more votes taken at the town meeting. So that's set. That's when the votes will happen.
The zoning ordinance vote will happen the Tuesday before, so you just.
At like 7 o'clock.
So you go to the.
No, 7
All day long.
So, are you asking about voting on changes to ordinances, or are you asking to publicly comment on an individual building permit?
No, just actually being able to vote, because I know like when the school district stuff happened about that, it was tricky for people to, even me, just be there at 8 o'clock at night with 2 little kids trying to vote. So I just wanted to thank you for having the parent session. And the only other question I had before I need to head out, are you able to speak at all to where in town this proposed cluster development idea is coming into play? I saw a lot about exit 17, exit 18, but even like where we're at right now is within 5 minutes of exit 18. How far are we talking pushing into town with some of these ideas?
Currently, clusters of that is permitted in residential, rural, and the Center Historic District. We're talking about if people approve of also allowing it. But there's also state law about this again. We're talking about adding it to be allowed in the ag conservation zone. But that's ADUs, not clusters, right? So, okay.
Okay, so only in the agricultural zone?
No, it's not the whole time. It's not the natural reserve area,
and not agriculture.
and it's not the commercial area.
Most places that you can currently build a house, you could theoretically.
Okay.
If there was
So
enough,
that is the
if there was enough space and you met all the other regulations, but based on zoning, pretty much anywhere that you currently can build a house, you could theoretically build a cluster.
Danielle Grabman, Rollins Road. So first of all, the last 2 years, I've organized babysitting for town meetings so that parents can have more input. You aren't the people to bring, thank you. You aren't the people to bring this up to, but it would be easier if it was earlier than 7. It's still really hard for people with young kids. They come. We've had a lot of parents and a lot of young kids there, but it gets tough after like 8.
I think it gets tough for all of us.
Yeah.
By 10 o'clock.
It's really trying not work with little kids.
I bet it's even tougher for the little kids.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah, so, just maybe something for us to think about as a town if we want parents' input, because parents do want to have input, and so thanks for including parents. Just going back to the conversation, I think the concern that everybody's expressing is that, maybe clusters might not meet the objectives that we're trying to solve, right? Alton Woods in Concord are older apartments. I work for visiting nurses, so I go to most of the apartments in Concord area. So they're older apartments, and it's usually somewhere between $2,200 and $2,600 per month rent to live there. Per unit. They're 1 to 2 bedroom units. They're modest, they're okay, they're older. They're huge, right? I think that if we built something new in Canterbury, even if it was a 6-unit, small 1-bedroom, it's a more desirable place, our taxes are higher, so it's gonna cost a heck of a lot more than that. So I think a concern I'm hearing from everybody is that maybe doing that isn't gonna be the solution to what, I want our teachers to be able to be here. I want people that create the character of the town to be able to stay here as they age. But I don't know if building smaller units is gonna solve that. Even the units on
we're not trying to solve the housing crisis nationally for the state or
I mean, I would
for
love
that county.
to, if you've got the ideas on that, like, you know, but, yeah.
Right. Just want to point out, kind of to your point, on ways that you might be able to make individual units more affordable. Something the board's talked about is the farmhouse proposal. In the packet, demographics and school enrollment, the last page, it just shows a couple of examples in Warner and Kentucky of homes that were actually renovated. They look like single-family farmhouses that were built in the 19th century. But they have, one in Warner has 11 units, the one in Kentucky has, I think let's see it here, 8 units. Both of those, as a property, are valued at over $600,000, but if you look at the value for each unit, they are more affordable. So there are ways to make housing more affordable like that, and those are some of the things that are pointing to right.
We have an example like that in Canterbury, it's a Canterbury Inn on Baptist, Canterbury Hall, excuse me,
It's 3 rental units and a number of like single room occupancy kind of thing, kind of a communal living situation for 8 to 10 people. This does some other things besides just provide more housing. It's a way that we can keep some of the big old agricultural buildings that we see around town that are being slowly melting into the ground. So if a big old farm unit could be turned into 2-3 units, and then maybe the people who are living there can help afford to pay the taxes, they can afford the maintenance, and it seems like that could be a better solution and preserve some buildings. And the character of the town. We have the barn over here that was torn down. People were looking at different options of protecting that, and we couldn't figure out how to do it within our ordinance. And so if that could have been a couple units in that barn, and maybe there's another couple units on the land behind, maybe we could have still have that building here in the center of town, and a little more business for the store, etc. Yes, please.
Hi, my name is Felipe. I live in Hatfield. I just want to touch back on the question that you and the other mother, sorry, I can't remember your names off the top of my head, for who would we address the idea of coming up with alternative voting solutions so people can feel represented and like everybody had time to do that sort of thing? I know that's not necessarily something for tonight, but I just wonder where we should start to have the conversation.
All other voting solutions like mail-in or?
Yeah, mail-in, I mean, just like to have a conversation around it.
Town hall, maybe.
Okay.
Yeah, that, certainly not the planning board.
Yeah, that's why I'm asking where
decisions,
A lot of the town meeting stuff is regulated above Canterbury.
Okay.
Oh, I see, so that's what you're saying, is that state law tells us how and voting.
Okay.
We'll address this on that Tuesday before town meeting, which is it's the second Tuesday of the month, and then the town meeting is the following Friday. So those are the 2 opportunities you're gonna have to address that. It'll be here, it'll be 12 hours of it if you wanna come sit with us. It's a devastating day.
So a lot of us have been here for a long time. I'd like to try to wrap up in 10 minutes.
I'd like to say thanks again for doing this.
Gentlemen?
Yeah, my name is Greg Kninsky. I live on Intervale Road. Just looking at the cluster resident, some of the ideas for change. Personally, I love the idea of trails and ball fields that are getting added in. I would be concerned if you're not adding in the roads being town maintained, and all of a sudden you don't really have access to that, especially if they decide to put up a gate or something like that. And then you're also talking about a outside entity to be the homeowners association. I have a father-in-law who lives up in Belmont, and his homeowners association is similar to what you were talking about. It was the community, and then they changed to an organization down in Florida.
To manage it?
To manage it. I'd be concerned with something like that happening with one of these, and how the community of Canterbury would then deal with this entity that probably owns 500 property associations or runs. So those would be some things that
Yes,
I would be concerned about just looking at these. Like I said, I think both are reasonable, but I think you would probably want to put some language in there around how that would be managed between the two.
We need to do more work on defining how that would work.
Yeah.
Right. I think everybody should understand that when the town is asked to accept a road, they vote on it, you vote on it, not the people building it or anything else. So you're always at the behest of the town meeting.
Okay.
And it can be a very difficult process, which is, as someone who's built a little house, it's hard to do to get them to accept it, right?
Yeah.
So I just.
Well, it's
keep-
money,
Yeah.
it's money.
Yeah.
Because somebody has to maintain it, either the town does or the homeowners
Yeah.
association, and somebody's gonna pay for it.
Yeah. I mean, I've been on trails and the homeowners association get the weird look even though it's public.
I want to address
Yeah.
something that if it's public land, they would have to provide a way to access. They can't gate it off. That's not, that's not.
So, I was just thinking about the sort of conversion of existing buildings into multi-family dwellings. It seems to me that would be, solve a lot of the questions that have been raised tonight about roads, the cost of roads, and some of the things, just based on my own experiences that come up are, when a judge comes in and talks to you about where the well's going to be versus the septic, they present the initial plan, and then halfway through the development, they'll come in and ask for waivers and ask for things to be closer together.
Yes.
Those kind of things that you can control during your meetings. And then to the point about the roads, in order when they do accept the roads and they do accept performance bonds, the poor town though then has to listen to the developer evaluate about getting their performance bonds back and get into all sorts of arguments about whether or not they could have or have not met the criteria. But in some cases, the board can control that by being very stringent about not giving back the performance bond until they're really satisfied. But you get yourself into hot water litigation like that way. So I think this conversion of the multi-family dwellings, especially in an agricultural environment, and presumably you want to preserve some of the countryside around Canterbury and farming community around Canterbury, I think is a better idea than these cluster developments.
Thank you. One more, two more?
I'll just piggyback on what she said, Donna Miller Baptist Road.
Name, please.
I just said Donna Miller Baptist
Oh,
Road.
that's on the
Anyway, just bonked so yeah, I like the idea. I love what happened at Canterbury Hall, and that there are so many people living there. But it takes a willing owner to say, "Oh, sure, I'll put all this time and money and effort into converting my big old farmhouse into this." So.
And it's not just the conversion, it's the maintenance and management.
Right.
Is that correct?
Right. So where are we at with that? Are there potential home conversions on the horizon?
Nothing has come to us about that,
We did mostly only say no. We can't
Also,
get people to do it.
Donna, you should know that they had to go get a variance for that because it's in the ag zone. And right now, we do not allow multi-units in the ag zone.
Yeah.
So that's one thing that this would address, is opening that up to the, so that the 70% of the town that's in ag conservation could do something like that.
Yeah. No, I think I heard that at the September meeting, brought that up. I wasn't here for October, and I think
it can be a new build. And that's the idea of making it look like a barn, or making it look like a farmhouse, rather than a traditional 6-unit apartment. They can make it look like a barn. It can be a brand new build, but to keep in the center of the town, keep it looking like it fits in Canterbury. That's what we're trying to do.
Yeah, that's what some of the incentive things where you can have more units if you follow X, Y, or Z rules. One of the things that we've talked about is incentivizing people to build things that look Canterbury-ish. Right.
Thank you all for attending and,
Thank you.
Thank you guys.
Thank you.